$18. That was the number at the bottom of a small green spiral notebook on a kitchen counter on Copley Road in Akron, Ohio in 1971. The notebook belonged to Ruth Connolly, the widow of a Firestone tire plant maintenance foreman, 67 years old, feeding herself and her disabled brother on $18 a week. The neighborhood average that year was $34. Ruth had cut her grocery bill exactly in half, and she had a notebook to prove it. 11 years of those notebooks sat in a shoebox under her bed. Number 9 on this list was the recipe she made every Wednesday for 14 years. Number 17 cost her 8 cents a serving. Number 22 was what she baked when the grocery money ran out. Hit that subscribe button if you want more of these stories, and let us count down the 25 cheap vintage recipes that can cut your grocery bill in half. Number 25. Pinto beans by the pound. Ruth Connolly bought a 10-pound bag of pinto beans at the Acme Market on West Market Street for $1.89. That bag produced 40 full servings for you and your family if you cooked it right. A single 16-ounce can of pork and beans at the same store cost 49 cents and fed one person once. The math was not subtle. Ruth soaked a pound of beans overnight in a blue speckled enamel pot, the same kind her mother had used in 1919, and simmered them the next morning with a quartered onion, a bay leaf, and a ham hock saved from a Sunday supper. By noon, the kitchen smelled of brown sugar and smoke. A bowl cost her about 4 cents, and her brother ate it with cornbread, like any working man at a kitchen table, and never once complained. The beans kept in the refrigerator for 5 days. They went into burritos on Monday, soup on Tuesday, a simple mash on Wednesday. Your grandmother did not think of beans as cheap food. She thought of them as honest food. That mattered. The difference between the canned version and her version was not the taste, it was the yield. Number 24. Homemade white bread. A loaf of Wonder Bread at the A&P in 1971 cost you 28 cents. Ruth made 2 loaves from a 5-pound sack of gold medal flour that cost her 59 cents, plus a packet of yeast at 9 cents, plus a splash of milk and a spoonful of sugar. Her per loaf cost was under 20 cents, and the loaves were nearly double the weight of what you pulled off the store shelf, like proper country bread instead of supermarket fluff. The dough rose in a yellow ceramic bowl on top of the radiator, slow and steady like a clock ticking toward supper. She punched it down twice. She baked it in 2 battered aluminum pans that had belonged to her mother. The crust was thick and the crumb was tight, and the slices held together under butter without tearing. Store bread, she wrote in the margin of her notebook, is mostly air. And that was the whole entry. Your whole family could eat from 1 loaf for 3 days. The savings across a year ran to nearly $40. Number 23. Scratch pancakes. A box of Aunt Jemima pancake mix at the IGA on North Main cost 39 cents and made about 18 pancakes, and you still had to add your own egg and milk. Ruth's recipe was flour, baking powder, salt, 1 egg milk, and a spoonful of oil. It cost her 11 cents to make the same 18 pancakes. She stacked them on a plate in the warm oven. Her brother ate 6 at a sitting with a thin syrup she made from brown sugar and hot water. The syrup cost her 2 cents a bottle. The mixed version cost 23 cents a bottle at the A&P. The difference per breakfast was small. Across a year, the difference was $14. And Ruth wrote that number in the back of the notebook and underlined it twice. She said small savings were small leaks in a boat. Each one alone meant nothing. Together, they sank you. Number 22. Egg fried rice. This was the recipe Ruth made when the grocery money ran out before Friday. Day-old rice from Sunday supper, 2 eggs, a splintered scallion from the windowsill, and a splash of soy sauce from a small brown bottle she kept for exactly this purpose. The whole pan cost her about 12 cents and fed 2 people, and she cooked it in a cast-iron skillet her husband had bought in 1947. The rice crackled against the hot iron like rain on a tin roof. The eggs scrambled into soft yellow curds. She served it in deep bowls with a spoon, not a fork. Her brother said it tasted better than anything at the diner, and he was not wrong. You could feed your own family from the same pan for the cost of a candy bar. A similar carton of fried rice at the Chinese place on Copley Road ran 89 cents for one serving in 1971. Ruth's pan fed 2 for 12 cents. Number 21. Potato soup. A 10-pound sack of Idaho potatoes at the Acme Market was 79 cents in the spring of 1971. That sack produced 8 full pots of potato soup, enough to feed your whole block if you had the ladles. The recipe was 5 potatoes, 1 onion, a tablespoon of butter, 2 cups of milk, salt, and a dusting of pepper. Ruth peeled the potatoes at the kitchen table with a paring knife worn thin from 30 years of use. The soup cooked in 25 minutes, and a single bowl cost less than 7 cents. On cold Akron mornings, it went into a thermos and traveled to her brother's bedside like a small portable furnace. That small detail kept him fed and kept her dignity intact. A can of Campbell's cream of potato at the Acme cost 19 cents and tasted of paste. Ruth's tasted of supper. The difference was not a recipe. It was the half hour you spent with a knife and a pot. That mattered. Number 20. Milk gravy on biscuits. Here is what most people miss about milk gravy. It was never a shortcut. It was the recipe that taught a generation how to stretch a spoonful of fat into a meal for 4. Ruth used 3 tablespoons of bacon grease she kept in a white ceramic crock next to the stove, 3 tablespoons of flour, 2 cups of whole milk, and a heavy pour of black pepper. The biscuits underneath were flour, baking powder, salt, and buttermilk. The whole plate cost your family about 11 cents, and her brother called it working man's breakfast. He had grown up eating it in a rail yard cottage outside Youngstown, and he said the taste took him back to a kitchen he had not stood in for 50 years. She made it every Sunday morning for 19 years. The bacon grease in the crock was free. It was the drip from your bacon breakfast 3 days earlier, waiting to feed the next meal. Number 19. Tuna noodle casserole. A can of chicken of the sea tuna at the A&P was 33 cents. A pound of egg noodles was 19 cents. A can of cream of mushroom soup was 19 cents. A small bag of frozen peas was 15 cents. Total cost for the casserole that fed 4 was 86 cents, or about 22 cents a plate. A comparable frozen dinner at the same store cost 69 cents for one person. Ruth topped the casserole with crushed saltines and a knob of butter. The crackers browned in the oven like a thin golden roof over the noodles. She served it in a rectangular Pyrex dish that had a chipped corner, but the leftovers reheated the next day with a splash of milk to loosen the sauce. Your grandmother probably made a version of this, and your mother probably made it too, and the recipe traveled from one woman's kitchen to another like a passed note, written on the back of a church bulletin or the inside cover of a cookbook somebody's daughter gave her. Number 18. Chipped beef on toast. The military called it SOS. Ruth called it Wednesday supper. A small jar of Armour dried beef cost 49 cents and was enough for 2 full meals. She rinsed the beef under cold water to cut the salt, tore it into ribbons, and stirred it into a white sauce of butter, flour, and milk. She ladled it over 2 slices of her homemade toast. Total cost per plate, about 14 cents. Her brother had eaten the same meal in a barracks at Camp Atterbury in 1943. He told her once that her version tasted of home and the Army's had not. That was the highest compliment he knew how to give. A frozen creamed beef entree at the Acme cost 59 cents in 1971. Ruth's was a quarter of the price, and it did not come out of a cardboard box. You tasted the milk and the pepper, not the preservatives. Number 17. Beans and wieners. This was the recipe Ruth Connolly ate herself when her brother was away at the VA hospital. A single frankfurter from a pack of 8 at the Acme was 7 cents. A cup of her home-cooked pinto beans was 4 cents. A spoonful of brown sugar and a dash of ketchup brought the whole bowl to under 9 cents. She ate it standing at the kitchen window, looking out at the Firestone smokestacks across the field. 1 pan, 1 bowl, 1 spoon. No leftovers because there was nobody else to feed. Number 17 cost her 8 cents a serving. She ate it 3 nights a week for the 6 weeks her brother was gone. She never told him. That was her business. You might eat the same meal if you lived alone on a small pension, the way widows and retired men have eaten it for 80 years. you would find it was not sad. It was quiet. It was the taste of a woman who had decided that her own company was enough. Number 16. Hoppin John. Black-eyed peas, rice, a smoked pork neck bone, an onion, and a pinch of red pepper. The peas came dried in a 1-pound bag for 29 cents. The neck bone was 19 cents at the butcher counter at Kroger. The rice came from a 5-pound sack that lasted Ruth 6 weeks. A full pot of Hoppin John cost her 41 cents and fed 4 people for 2 days. Her brother had picked up the recipe from a black cook named Minnie Booker in the Firestone plant cafeteria during the war. Minnie had cooked it as her mother had cooked it in South Carolina, and she had written it on a scrap of butcher paper that Ruth's brother brought home in his lunch pail in 1943. Ruth made it every New Year's Day for 23 years. The peas were supposed to bring luck. She was not superstitious. She made it anyway, the way you keep a small promise to somebody who trusted you with a recipe. Per bowl, about 10 cents. A can of Lux seasoned black-eyed peas at the Acme cost 27 cents and tasted of tin. Number 15. Red beans and rice. Here is something most people forget about red beans. They were never a side dish in Ruth's kitchen. They were the whole supper. Dried red kidney beans at 27 cents a pound, 1 smoked ham shank at 69 cents, a stalk of celery, 1 onion, 1 green pepper, garlic, bay leaf, thyme, and a long simmer. The beans cooked down into a thick, earthy gravy that coated every grain of rice. 1 pound of dried beans produced 12 full servings. Per plate cost was under 9 cents. This was the lost discipline of meal planning. Ruth did not walk into the Acme market with a list of dinners and shop for them. She walked in with a list of staples, bought them in bulk, and worked backwards from the pantry to build every meal from what was already there. Her notebook tracked the price per ounce of every staple across every store in Akron. Flour at the A&P, rice at the IGA, beans at the Acme, onions from the Saturday Farmers Market on South Main. She drove a blue 1962 Ford Fairlane between 4 stores every Friday morning. She batch cooked every Monday. She used every scrap. A chicken carcass became stock. A crust of stale bread became pudding. An onion skin went into the beans for color. Nothing left her kitchen except in somebody's stomach. That was the whole philosophy, and the notebook proved it worked. Number 14. Cabbage rolls. A head of cabbage at the Acme was 19 cents. A pound of ground beef was 59 cents. Half a cup of rice from the 5-pound sack was about 3 cents. A can of tomato sauce was 11 cents. That was the whole recipe. Ruth blanched the cabbage leaves in a big pot of salted water, the way you blanch tomatoes for peeling, rolled them around the beef and rice filling, and baked them covered in a low oven for 2 hours. The rolls fed 4 adults and produced enough leftovers for a second meal. Per plate cost was 23 cents. A similar frozen entree at the Acme ran 59 cents for one. The savings were not theoretical. They were written in pencil in Ruth's notebook on the line dated October 11, 1971. She had learned the recipe from a Hungarian neighbor named Mrs. Kovacs, who lived 3 doors down and who had brought a tray of them over the week Ruth's husband died. Ruth had kept the tray for 21 years and used it to bake the same rolls every month. Number 13. Oat meatloaf. Ground beef at 59 cents a pound was the most expensive staple Ruth bought. She stretched it with oatmeal, the way country cooks had stretched every pound of meat for 100 years. A cup of rolled oats from a Quaker canister cost her about 5 cents. Mixed into a pound of beef with an egg, an onion, and a splash of ketchup, it produced a meatloaf that fed 5 people. The oats absorbed the juices and kept the loaf moist. Her brother never knew they were in there. He thought it was just a particularly tender meatloaf. She never corrected him. Per plate cost, 17 cents. The same weight of store-bought meatloaf at the deli counter was 89 cents a pound. That was the whole point of the oats. Your dollar stretched roughly 5 times further if you were willing to do your own mixing and your own shaping and your own hour in the oven. The oats cost less than the beef they replaced. That was the part nobody explained on the back of the Quaker canister. Number 12. American goulash. Not Hungarian goulash. The cheap kind. 1 pound of ground beef, 1 onion, 1 green pepper, a box of elbow macaroni at 23 cents, a can of tomato sauce, a can of diced tomatoes, and a heavy hand of paprika. Here is the math of scratch cooking nobody talks about. A 10-ounce frozen lasagna at the Acme cost 79 cents and fed 1 person. Ruth's goulash cost 96 cents total and fed 6. Per plate, 16 cents versus 79 cents. The food industry was not charging you for ingredients. It was charging you for time. For somebody else to do the browning, the chopping, the simmering, and the cleanup. The convenience cost was roughly 5 times the ingredient cost. That ratio held true across every frozen entree, every boxed mix, every canned dinner on the shelves. Ruth Connolly was not a cheap cook. She was a person who had decided that her time was worth less than the 60 cents per plate she saved by doing the work herself. That decision came with a trade. It took her 3 hours every Sunday to batch cook the week. It took her another hour every night to put supper on the table. Time was the currency she spent to keep her grocery bill at $18. Most Americans in 1971 made the opposite trade. They paid the food industry to give them their evenings back, like a quiet subscription to a service nobody named. Neither choice was wrong. They were just different bets on what mattered. Ruth had made her bet, and the notebook under her bed was the ledger. Number 11. Spaghetti with tomato sauce. A 1-pound box of Ronzoni spaghetti at the IGA was 23 cents. A 15-ounce can of Hunt's tomato sauce was 17 cents. An onion, 2 cloves of garlic, a spoonful of olive oil, a pinch of oregano. Ruth's whole pot fed 4 people for 49 cents, per plate cost 12 cents. A can of Chef Boyardee spaghetti at the same store cost 39 cents and fed 1 person. The math was embarrassing, but Ruth was not embarrassed. She grated a thin snow of Parmesan over the top from a green Kraft canister and served it in her white dinner bowls. Her brother said the garlic smelled of a Sicilian widow's kitchen he had visited once in Sharon, Pennsylvania. He said it gently, the way you say something you half remember from a year nobody else can name. Your grandmother probably made the same sauce. The onion and the garlic went in cold oil and bloomed slowly. The tomato went in after. The pot simmered for 40 minutes. That was the whole recipe. Number 10. Lentil soup. Lentils did not exist in most American pantries in 1971. Ruth had learned the recipe from an Armenian neighbor named Varsig Bedrosian, who lived 2 houses down on Copley Road. Varsig brought over a jar of soup one January afternoon when Ruth was down with the flu, and the jar was still warm from the stove, wrapped in a dish towel. The soup was lentils, carrots, celery, onion, cumin, and a squeeze of lemon. A 1-pound bag of dried lentils at the health food store on Market Street cost 49 cents and produced 6 full pots of soup. Per bowl, about 3 cents. Ruth wrote the recipe in the back of the notebook on a page she had labeled Varsig. She made it every Tuesday for the next 11 years. Your own pantry might have the same bag of lentils in it right now. A can of Progresso lentil soup at the Acme in 1971 cost 29 cents and fed 1. Ruth's pot fed 6 for about the same money, and the lemon at the end was the trick Varsig had taught her on the porch that January afternoon. Number 9. Split pea and ham bone soup. Here is the recipe Ruth made every Wednesday for 14 years. A pound of dried split peas at 29 cents. The ham bone she had saved in a wax paper bundle in the freezer from Easter or Christmas. 1 onion, 2 carrots, 2 stalks of celery, a bay leaf, and water. The peas broke down over 3 hours on the back burner into a thick green porridge that smelled of smoked pork and pepper. The bone gave up its last marrow into the pot. She served it with a slice of her homemade bread on the side, and per bowl cost about 6 cents. Her brother said it was the meal that tasted most like their mother's kitchen in Canton, Ohio, in 1919. Ruth did not argue. She did not agree either. She just ladled out a second bowl. You could make the same soup in your own kitchen today with a ham bone your butcher would give you for $1. The technique has not changed in 100 years. Number 8. Tomato soup cake. A can of Campbell's tomato soup at 13 cents a cup of flour, a cup of sugar, an egg, baking soda, cinnamon, cloves, and raisins. That was the whole recipe. The tomato soup replaced the liquid and the fat in a quiet substitution nobody questioned. The cake baked up moist and spicy and reddish brown. Nobody could taste the tomato. Ruth frosted it with a thin cream cheese icing when she could afford the cream cheese. When she could not, she dusted it with powdered sugar. Per slice cost about 4 cents, but a slice of store bakery cake at the A&P ran 22 cents. This was the recipe she baked for church bake sales at Our Lady of the Elms Parish for 9 years. The other women asked for it. She never gave them the secret. The secret was that if you made a cake with soup, you did not have to tell anybody where the liquid came from. You just smiled when they praised the spice. Number 7, depression cake. No eggs, no butter, no milk. The original wartime recipe Ruth's mother had taught her in 1932. Flour, sugar, cocoa, baking soda, salt, water, vinegar, and oil. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda and gave the cake its rise. It baked up dark and tender and forgiving. Per cake, about 19 cents. A boxed Duncan Hines cake mix at the same store was 49 cents and required an egg and half a cup of oil on top. Ruth made the depression cake for birthdays. She made it for her brother's 68th in 1971 and wrote the date in her notebook. She put 6 candles on it because that was all she had. He blew them out in one breath. Your grandmother probably baked the same cake during the war. She probably taught your mother, who probably forgot about it by the 1980s. The recipe is still in some old church cookbook in a box in somebody's attic. Number 6, milk toast. A slice of her homemade bread, toasted brown, buttered thin, and drowned in hot milk with a sprinkle of sugar and a dusting of cinnamon. The British called it poor nights. Ruth called it sick day supper. Her brother had eaten it for weeks after a minor surgery at Akron General in the fall of 1969 when nothing heavier would stay down. Per bowl cost about 6 cents. It was not a fancy recipe. It was not a celebration recipe. It was the recipe you made when somebody you loved was too tired to chew. You poured the milk hot, but not scalding. You let it sit for a minute so the bread soaked. You ate it with a spoon because a fork did not work. Most cookbooks had quietly dropped it by 1980. Ruth never did. The recipe did not cost anything extra because the bread was already there and the milk was already there. It was just the kindest way to use them. Number 5, neckbone stew. Here is the part of this story that surprised me. Neck bones in 1971 cost 15 cents a pound at the Kroger butcher counter on East Market Street. The same butcher, in 2026, now charges $5 a pound for the exact same cut because somebody wrote a cookbook calling it heritage pork. Ruth simmered 3 pounds of neck bones for 4 hours with potatoes, carrots, onions, and a bay leaf. The meat fell off the bones in shreds, the way autumn leaves drop off a branch in late October. The marrow enriched the broth. The pot fed 5 adults for less than $1. Per bowl, about 18 cents. The meat tasted richer than any pork chop she could afford. That was the whole trick. The cheap cuts were never cheap because they were bad. They were cheap because most people did not know how to cook them. You needed time and low heat and patience. You did not need skill. Your grandmother probably did it without thinking, standing at a stove for an afternoon while she wrote a letter or mended a hem. Number 4, chicken back and rice. A chicken at the Acme cost 39 cents a pound in 1971. Chicken backs and wings cost 7 cents a pound. Ruth bought 3 pounds of backs for 21 cents, simmered them in water with an onion and a stalk of celery for 2 hours, pulled the bones, skimmed the fat, and poured the broth over a cup of rice in a covered pan. The rice soaked up the broth like a sponge takes up water, and the shreds of meat nestled into every grain. The pan fed 4 people for 27 cents total. Per plate, about 7 cents. Her brother called it Sunday supper, and she served it on the blue and white plates her mother had brought from Hungary in 1907. That was the only heirloom she owned. You could make the same dish tonight for about $4 if you knew which bin at your butcher counter held the backs. Most shoppers walked past that bin every week. Number 3. Skillet cornbread. Here is the emotional cost of cheap cooking that most people do not talk about. It took hours. A pan of cornbread was simple to bake, but the beans under it took 6 hours on the stove. The neck bones took 4. The bread took half a day from first rise to cooling rack. Ruth Connolly cooked on average 4 hours every weekday and 8 hours every Sunday. She was a widow with no job and a brother to care for. Most of her neighbors on Copley Road could not have chosen her schedule if they had wanted to. They worked at Firestone and Goodyear and B.F. Goodrich. They came home at 6, ate supper at 6:30, and collapsed into a chair by 7:15. The idea that they could have batch-cooked pinto beans on a Sunday afternoon assumed a Sunday afternoon that was theirs to spend. Most did not have it. Cheap cooking was cheap only in dollars. In hours, it was expensive. And the people who needed the savings the most, the double-shift parents, the night nurses, the cleaners, the line workers, were the ones who had the fewest hours to spend. Ruth knew this. She had written it in her notebook on a page dated November 3, 1971. Her exact words were, "Time is money for most people. For me, time is all I have. So the savings are mine to take." The reason cheap cooking has disappeared is not that Americans forgot how. It is that two-earner households and long commutes stole the hours. The recipes still work. The math still works. The clock is the problem. Ruth's pan of cornbread, by the way, cost 11 cents and cooled on a wire rack while the beans finished, sitting in its black iron skillet like a small monument to a kind of patience most of you cannot afford to keep. Number 2. Refrigerator pickles. A pound of pickling cucumbers from the Saturday Farmers Market on South Main cost 25 cents in August. A quart jar, a cup of white vinegar, a spoonful of salt, a spoonful of sugar, a few dill sprigs, and 3 cloves of garlic. Ruth put up 4 quarts in an hour, working at a small assembly line of her own. The pickles kept in the refrigerator for 6 weeks. Per spear cost about 2 cents. A jar of Vlasic dills at the Acme was 69 cents for 16 spears, or a little over 4 cents each. The savings were small, but they compounded the way interest compounds. Ruth's brother ate a pickle with every supper. Across a year, she saved about $11 on pickles alone. She wrote it down. Your own garden cucumbers in August, if you have a garden, cost effectively nothing. The vinegar is the only real ingredient. Everything else is already in your spice drawer, waiting. Number 1. Bread pudding. The recipe that turned every stale loaf into dessert. Ruth tore 2 days of leftover homemade bread into a buttered baking dish, poured over a custard of 3 eggs, 2 cups of milk, half a cup of sugar, a splash of vanilla, a handful of raisins, and a dusting of cinnamon and nutmeg. She baked it in a slow oven for 45 minutes until the top puffed and browned. Per serving, about 8 cents. A slice of bakery cake at the A&P ran 25 cents. Her brother ate bread pudding warm with a spoonful of cream from the top of the milk bottle. He said it was the best dessert she made. That might have been true, or it might have been the kindest thing he knew how to say to a sister who had kept him alive on $18 a week for 14 years. Your grandmother probably made bread pudding when her bread went stale. The recipe was never written down in most kitchens. It was just what you did with yesterday's loaf. Straight out of the royal family's dinner table, beef Wellington was a beef steak dish with the perfect regal twist. This delicacy was made of a tender beef fillet coated with pâté and duxelles, then wrapped in puff pastry, which made it just as fancy as it sounds. It was traditionally served with a rich red wine sauce, such as a Madeira or Cabernet Sauvignon reduction. Now, the origin of this meal is shrouded in history, but it is suggested that it emerged in England in the 19th century and was named after the Duke of Wellington, Arthur Wellesley. This steak required a lot of time and patience, which made it a meal for only the royals of England. It's a part of ancient history now, but you might be able to taste it if you make your way to Regal Balls or a Michelin star restaurant in London. Ground beef and wild mustard greens. Stir-fry was the kind of meal that showed up fast and disappeared even faster. This was not some high-end stir-fry piled with expensive sauces either. It was a down-home skillet sizzler made with ground beef cooked hot and fast, tossed with handfuls of peppery wild mustard greens, plucked fresh from wherever you could find them. Those greens had bite. real bite, and they gave the beef this sharp, earthy pop that plain old spinach could only dream of. A splash of vinegar, a sprinkle of salt, and maybe a little bacon grease if you had it lying around, and you had a dish that punched way above its weight. It was light enough for summer, hearty enough for winter, and cheap enough to keep families fed when money was just a rumor. Stir-fries like these were the ultimate in practical magic, a fast meal that felt like you had been planning it all day. And if you thought a pile of spicy greens and sizzling beef was as good as it gets, just wait until you bite into a crispy pocket filled with beef and roasted roots, the kind of thing great-grandma used to make when the nights got cold. Chow mein hot dish was a Midwestern potluck legend. It walked into the room carrying the scent of soy sauce and sizzling beef and left behind nothing but an empty casserole dish and a few requests for the recipe. Born sometime between post-war optimism and the suburban casserole boom, this dish took inspiration from Chinese-American takeout and made it its own. Ground beef was browned with chopped onions and celery, then mixed with a savory sauce, usually soy sauce and a can of cream of mushroom soup. That combination might sound odd, but it made everything come together with a velvety, umami-heavy punch. But the real fun started when you dumped a whole can of crunchy chow mein noodles right on top before baking. But if that flavor combination sounds bold, buckle up, because the next dish on this forgotten road trip adds soda to the skillet and somehow makes it work. The name alone made kids raise their eyebrows, but once they tasted it, they stopped asking. Upside-down beef casserole was ground beef and vegetables poured into a dish, topped with biscuit dough and baked until golden. Then came the fun part. You flipped it. Or at least tried to. Sometimes it held together, sometimes it did not. But the flavors were always there. The beef had onion, salt, maybe garlic powder if you had it. The vegetables were canned corn, peas, carrots, whatever needed using. The biscuit crust crisped on top and soaked up flavor underneath. It was a hot, messy miracle. This came from a time when housewives were told to make dinner an experience, and this counted. Flipping it added excitement when life had little of it. It was a clever way to turn old ingredients into something new. No rules. Leftovers? In they went. Cheese? Sprinkle it on. Dinner was supposed to be practical, but it could still surprise you. Squirrel stew might sound unusual today, but it was a popular dish in rural areas. Yep, our bushy-tailed friends were once a common ingredient in many kitchens. Also known as Brunswick stew, it was a tomato-based stew generally involving local beans, vegetables, and originally small game meat such as squirrel. However, many variations from around the world used rabbit meat too. The origin of this meaty stew is controversial at best, as the states of Virginia and Georgia both claim its birth, with Brunswick County in Virginia and the city of Brunswick in Georgia claiming it was developed there. To keep things peaceful, let's just say Virginia and Georgia both played a role in creating this delicious stew. Squirrel meat was easily hunted and provided a necessary source of protein. With the rise of chicken, squirrel stew has fallen out of flavor. But hey, this one is pretty easy to whip up and will satisfy your Thursday night meat cravings like no other. Smothered ground. Beef and hominy was the kind of meal that did not just fill your plate, it filled your soul. Ground beef cooked slow and easy, seasoned with just enough spice to keep things interesting, and then tossed together with hominy so tender it almost melted in your mouth. If you have never had hominy before, just picture corn but bigger, puffier, and somehow even more satisfying. When the juices from the beef soaked into every kernel, you got a dish that was buttery, savory, and rich enough to carry you through an entire winter's night. Families back then knew that when you needed a dinner that would power you through long days and longer nights, this was it. It was not fancy food, but it was food that made you feel like you were winning at life, even when the cupboards were looking bare. Now, if you thought beef and hominy could turn a plain night into something unforgettable, get ready to bite into a dish that brought every powwow to life with a little bit of crunch and a whole lot of heart. Wartime ration hash was not glamorous. It did not pretend to be. But in homes across America during the 1940s, it was dinner, and often a lifesaver. This dish was the ultimate answer to food rationing and meat shortages. You would take whatever you had, Maybe a handful of ground beef, a bruised potato, a few limp carrots, and you made it work. Breadcrumbs or oats were added to stretch the beef as far as it could possibly go. Sometimes there were bits of canned green beans or peas tossed in, and if you were lucky, an egg to bind it all together. Everything went into a pan and got crisped until the edges browned and the bottom stuck just a bit to the skillet. Flavor gold, right there. It taught families how to use every last crumb, and it gave a warm, filling meal when the world felt cold and uncertain. But when times got a little better, and people had a bit more to spend, things got saucier, cheesier, and a whole lot more comforting. Before it made its comeback on social media, beef and tater tot hot dish was already a legend in Midwest kitchens. You browned your ground beef with onion, layered it in a casserole dish, topped it with a can of cream soup, mushroom, celery, chicken, and crowned it with frozen tater tots. Then you baked it until it bubbled. The tots crisped up, the meat stayed saucy, and the whole house smelled like a snow day with nothing else to do but eat. It was cheap, easy, and had everything: protein, carbs, salt, and memory. This dish was never about nutrition. It was about morale. It showed up at church dinners, weeknights, and holiday leftovers. It was a blank canvas, too. Add corn, peas, cheese, whatever needed using. The best versions were a little sloppy, with crisp edges and soft centers. The first scoop might burn your tongue, but no one waited. It was casserole as comfort, and it worked. A meal that made you forget the weather, the bills, and the stress, just for a minute. Before chicken became everyone's favorite pie stuffing, rabbit pie was a favorite on the Easter table. Made out of tender rabbit meal, this savory pie was a household favorite in many rural areas. Rabbit meat is not only rich in flavor, but it's full of nutrients, which made this a healthy choice for many and a staple of the American pioneers. Plus, rabbit meat didn't cost a fortune like most meat back in the day and was widely available. Along with rabbit meat, ingredients of the filling of a rabbit pie typically included onions, celery, and carrots. Some English variations included prunes, bacon, and cider, while the Australians sometimes included the food paste Vegemite. Rabbits aren't as common as they were back then, so rabbit pie has vanished from our tables and Easter traditions. You know what? All good things come to an end. Nostalgic beef and sweet corn fry casserole was the dish that looked like a mess but tasted like a memory. Imagine browned ground beef bubbling under a thick layer of golden sweet corn kernels, all tied together with a few shakes of salt and pepper and a little bit of cream if you had it. Baked until the top got crispy and the edges turned caramel brown, it was the kind of casserole that made the whole house smell like comfort. In the 1970s, every family potluck or backyard gathering had at least one version of it, usually scribbled onto a crumpled index card or passed down by word of mouth. Sweet corn was cheap, beef was precious, and when you married the two together, you got a dish that somehow managed to feel luxurious, even when times were lean. The first spoonful always hit you with that sweet, salty magic, and before you knew it, you were scraping the sides of the pan for just one more bite. And if you thought this casserole was the gold standard of hearty, simple eats, just wait until you dive into a beef and hominy masterpiece that practically invented stick-to-your-ribs cooking. Coca-Cola beef skillet might sound like something dreamed up at a county fair food stand, but back in the 1960s, it was a weeknight marvel. You took a skillet, browned up a pound of ground beef with onions, added a healthy squeeze of ketchup, and then, here's the twist, poured in a splash of Coca-Cola. That was the secret sauce. The soda added a surprising depth, a sticky sweetness that balanced the tang of the ketchup and rounded out the beefy base. It cooked down into something thick and glossy, like a glaze that made every bite feel more indulgent than it had any right to be. Kids went wild for it, and parents loved that it took maybe 15 minutes to get on the table. Coca-Cola beef skillet was the edible proof that the best meals often come from a bit of whimsy and whatever is sitting in the fridge door. And if pasta was your pantry fallback, then the next recipe might just be your new meatloaf obsession. Beef and cottage cheese bake sounds like a weird combination today, but it was considered smart back then. The ground beef was browned and seasoned, then mixed with egg noodles, onions, and generous scoops of cottage cheese. Sometimes there was sour cream, sometimes there was tomato sauce, but it always ended up creamy, savory, and just the right kind of filling. It was especially good for households trying to add protein without buying more meat. Cottage cheese was cheap, and it lasted longer than you expected. This was a casserole that blended dairy and meat in a way that was not fancy but worked. It came out of the oven bubbling, with a top that browned slightly and a center that held together like lasagna without the effort. You could serve it straight from the pan, and it held heat like a dream. Some versions added peas or bell peppers for color, others stayed pure and beige and soft. Either way, it filled the belly and made people happy. In a time when families were cutting coupons and stretching paychecks, this was a dinner you could count on. Simple, practical, and more delicious than it had any right to be. Pressed duck, a French-inspired masterpiece, is just as complex as it sounds. The dish involves cooking a duck and then using a special press to extract the blood and juices, which are then used to create a rich, flavorful sauce. You heard that right? A sauce made out of blood and bone marrow. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, this dish was a showstopper at French restaurants back in the day, and its unique taste spoke for itself. The complex dish was a specialty of Rouen, and its creation was attributed to an innkeeper from the city of Duclair. It's also known as canard à la presse, and is a specialty of the Tour d'Argent restaurant in Paris. Cooking pressed duck isn't a job for the weak and requires special time and effort, which is exactly why it has become a rare dinner time on our tables now. And then, of course, not everyone has a knack for eating a sauce made out of bone marrow. Beef and sage cornbread bake was the kind of Sunday special that made you race home from church just to get first dibs. Ground beef browned up with onions and a heavy hand of fresh sage was tucked under a thick, buttery layer of cornbread batter, then baked until everything was bubbling and golden. The sage gave the beef this deep, woodsy flavor that wrapped around the sweet cornbread like a warm hug. You would walk into the kitchen, and the smell alone would tell you that it was going to be a good day. Plates were heaped high, smothered with gravy if you had a little extra energy, or eaten straight out of the pan if you just could not wait. This was the kind of dish that felt like a full holiday dinner, even if it was just an ordinary Sunday. You knew you were doing something right when every last crumb got scraped up by someone pretending they were just being polite. And if you thought beef and sage were a heavenly match in the oven, just wait until you see how beef, sunflower seeds, and a cast iron skillet could team up for a dish so hearty it practically stood up and shook your hand. Beef macaroni loaf was what happened when mid-century homemakers got bored of plain old meatloaf and decided to shake things up, just a little. At first glance, it looked like the usual mix of ground beef, breadcrumbs, and seasoning. But inside, hiding like a delicious surprise, was elbow macaroni, cooked just shy of tender and folded right into the mix. Some versions even swapped out breadcrumbs entirely and used the pasta as the binder. Then came the tomato soup, poured in for moisture, color, and that unmistakable tangy sweet kick that Campbell's fans know all too well. The result was dense, hearty, and oddly elegant, like meatloaf had finally grown up and gotten a little flair. And because macaroni stretched the meat further, it was perfect for feeding bigger families on a budget. But for folks who wanted a more southern touch, the next dish took cornbread to places it had never gone before. Mock Swiss steak with ground beef was not fooling anyone, but no one minded. The original called for a real steak pounded flat and simmered in tomato gravy. The ground beef version skipped all that and made a patty. You browned it in a skillet, poured canned tomatoes over it, added onions, and let it simmer. The result was part burger, part meatloaf. It was soft, it was salty, it was cheap and dependable. In homes where steak was not on the menu, this was how you pretended. People served it with mashed potatoes or egg noodles, maybe a slice of white bread for the gravy. A pound of ground beef could stretch far if you shaped it right. This recipe showed up in many cookbooks from the 1960s and 1970s. It had different names: mock steak, gravy patties, poor man's steak, but the idea stayed. Make something that felt like more than it was. The kind of dinner that said, "This will do," and really meant it. Now, the French weren't fans of the rabbit pie, so they decided to whip up a pigeon pie instead. This delicacy dates all the way back to the 17th century when James Hart, a Scottish physician, wrote in 1633 that pigeon pies were usually served with far too much pepper. It became an instant hit after Hart's paper, and people started cutting down on the pepper a bit. This crispy dish was a savory game pie made of pigeon meat and various other ingredients traditional to French cuisine. The buttery crust made it a luxurious treat which was common on banquet tables. It was a tradition for wives to make pigeon pie after their husbands spent long days hunting for the delicious bird. But hey, tastes change, and so do our feathered friends. Traditional cedar-smoked beef skewers were one of those dishes that proved you did not need 1,000 ingredients to create something unforgettable. Beef was marinated with just salt, pepper, and maybe a brush of honey if you were feeling wild, then threaded onto wooden sticks and slow roasted over cedar branches. The cedar smoke wrapped itself around the beef, sinking deep into every fiber, turning a simple skewer into a feast that could make even the grumpiest neighbor smile. You would find folks gathered around fire pits, laughing and trading stories while keeping an eye on their skewers, turning them every so often to get that perfect even char. There was something about the smell of cedar smoke that felt like a hug from nature itself, especially when it meant that dinner was almost ready. Kids would sneak bites straight off the sticks, adults would pile them high on plates, and nobody ever left hungry. And if you thought cedar smoke could work miracles on plain beef, wait until you see how mustard greens and ground beef teamed up for one of the most overlooked flavor combos in history. Shipwreck stew looked like a mess, which was the idea. It was all layered into one pot: ground beef, potatoes, rice, canned soup, and maybe a few carrots. No stirring. Just stack it and let it simmer. The name came from how it looked, but the flavor was comforting. It was hearty, tangy, and always filling. This was survival food, emotional or otherwise. No fancy steps. The soup worked as sauce and seasoning. The starches made the beef stretch. It fed a whole family and left some for tomorrow. There was beauty in the chaos. Each family had their version, passed down in notes and memory. Some added beans, others swapped pasta for rice, but all of them made it work. Shipwreck stew meant one thing: making do. And maybe that is why it felt so good. It filled the plate, the belly, and sometimes the quiet. Bear meat might seem like something out of a survivalist's handbook, but it was once a prized delicacy in many cultures. The roast loin of bear was considered a special occasion dish, reserved for feasts and celebrations. This dish has deep roots in the culinary traditions of the early American settlers. As you can imagine, hunting a bear was a daunting task, so this meal was a reward for bravery. Apart from the hunting of the bears, this one wasn't complicated to whip up. All you needed was the loin, which is the tender strip of meat along the backbone, which was often roasted over an open fire. Now, this is one meaty dish. Well, it doesn't take rocket science to know why this one has vanished from our tables. I bet you're not up to the task of hunting a bear, are you? Crispy corn cakes. Stuffed with seasoned beef were one of those foods you could smell cooking before you even stepped into the event. Little golden discs sizzling in big iron skillets, stuffed to the brim with ground beef seasoned with paprika, onions, and a pinch of chili powder if you wanted to wake up your taste buds. The outside was crunchy and golden, the inside savory and juicy. It was a dance of textures that made you keep reaching for just one more. The trick was to keep the corn cakes thin enough that they crisped up, but thick enough to hold all that seasoned beef inside without falling apart. At powwows and fairs, you would see kids running around with one in each hand, faces smeared with beefy goodness, while the elders sat back and nodded approvingly. It was simple, it was satisfying, and it was the perfect food for big gatherings where nobody had time for forks and knives. And if you think crispy stuffed corn cakes sound irresistible, wait until you pull up a camp chair and hear about the kind of chili that made starry nights and crackling fires taste even better. Old school goulash, or as some knew it, American chop suey, was the dish that proved ground beef and elbow macaroni were soulmates. This one-pot wonder became a fixture on stovetops from Maine to Missouri. It started with browned beef, onions, and garlic, all bubbling away in a pot. Then came the crushed tomatoes or tomato sauce, which turned the mix into a deep red stew. Toss in a few handfuls of cooked macaroni, and suddenly you had dinner for 6, and maybe lunch tomorrow. What made goulash so special was not just the taste, though that was plenty satisfying. It was the simplicity. It was comfort food with no rules, and that made it a favorite in kitchens where imagination mattered more than a well-stocked pantry. Goulash was the dish that filled plates and hearts at the same time. But if you think that was creative, wait until you see what happened when someone took a bag of corn chips and turned it into dinner. This was not something you would ever find in a restaurant, but every church cookbook in the country had a version. Cowboy pie was rough and hearty. Ground beef, baked beans, and a biscuit topping that crisped up in the oven just enough to hold everything together. There were no cowboys involved, but it felt like something a hungry ranch hand would love. It was warm, it was messy, and it filled you right up. The base was usually ground beef cooked down with onions, and sometimes a little barbecue sauce or ketchup, then a layer of baked beans, canned of course, and a topping of drop biscuits or biscuit dough from a box. When it came out of the oven, it was golden and bubbling and maybe a little lopsided. No one cared. It was dependable. You served it with a spoon straight from the pan and hoped there was enough left for seconds. The kind you made when the pantry was running low but dinner still had to happen. And somehow, it always hit the spot. Jellied eels were a staple on the dinner table back in the 1900s. This dish was whipped up in London in the 18th century, when a bored chef decided to mix things up a bit. Here's the thing. Eels were dirt cheap back in the day, so they were everyone's favorite source of meat. The dish consisted of chopped eels boiled in a spiced stock and allowed to cool and set, forming a jelly. It was usually served cold and made a good substitute for dessert. Since it was light on the pockets, the English loved to serve it at dinner parties and festivals. It also made its way out to other parts of Europe such as Denmark and Sweden, which came up with their own versions of the jelly. You won't find a lot of people talking about jellied eels now, because it has largely disappeared from the British menus. But hey, if you're ever feeling adventurous enough, I say give this one a try. Fry bread beef sliders were the secret weapon at backyard parties before sliders even became a restaurant thing. Imagine little puffs of fresh fry bread, split in half, stacked high with juicy ground beef, seasoned with a wild mix of herbs, and just enough kick to make you take notice. These were not your fancy brioche bun sliders either. They had a rustic, crispy bite that somehow made the beef taste even beefier. Toss on a dollop of smoky sauce or a handful of pickled onions if you were feeling fancy, but honestly, nothing beat the classic. Beef, fry bread, and maybe a thin slice of tomato if it was growing in the garden. It was the kind of food that got you running back to the table before the adults could claim the last one. You might think nothing could top biting into one of those crispy, steamy little bundles, but the next dish might just prove otherwise. Beef birds, sometimes called mock steak rolls, were the kind of food that made you feel like you were having a fancy dinner, even if the meat came from the budget bin. The idea was simple but genius. Take seasoned ground beef, flatten it out like you are making an edible canvas, roll it up with stuffing or sometimes chopped onions inside, then tie or skewer it like it is some French roast on Sunday dinner. These little bundles were browned in a pan and sometimes finished in gravy, soaking up every bit of flavor like they had been waiting all day for it. The texture was soft, the taste was rich, and the presentation, well, that part made you feel like you were dining at a place that had real cloth napkins. They were a perfect disguise for humble ingredients. And just when you think the American kitchen could not get more inventive, along came a dish that turned ground beef into a noodle-topped flavor bomb with a crunchy surprise. They were called porcupine meatballs because they looked exactly like that. Tiny ground beef meatballs with stiff little spikes of rice sticking out. Uncooked rice mixed right into the meat would expand while simmering in tomato sauce, giving it a look that was part dinner and part art project. You could find these in old spiral-bound cookbooks with a plastic comb spine, and maybe some notes written in pen along the edges. These meatballs were not about elegance, they were about getting a meal to stretch. The rice helped the beef go farther, the sauce gave it moisture, and kids thought it was fun to look at. Most of the time, the sauce was just canned tomato soup mixed with a little bit of onion or seasoning. No fancy herbs, no Parmesan cheese, just whatever you had. In homes where meat had to be portioned out carefully, porcupine meatballs were a bit of a magic trick. If you think the beef heart is off limits for cuisine, you're wrong, because stuffed hearts were once a celebrated dish. This dish sounds like something out of a horror movie, but it was actually quite common. Think of the beef heart cleaned, stuffed with a mixture of breadcrumbs, herbs, and often pine nuts or raisins, and then roasted or braised. Sounds appetizing yet? This economical and tasty meal was a testament to the nose-to-tail philosophy of cooking, where no part of the animal was wasted. In Europe, the practice of stuffing animal hearts dates back to medieval times. It was a popular dish amongst the working class in England, while it was reserved for the elite in France. Eating hearts isn't as common today, but if you ever tried this one, you'd understand the hype. Reservation-style ground beef and wild onion tacos were the kind of everyday magic that kept folks smiling even when times were tight. Ground beef was stretched thin, seasoned with salt, pepper, and whatever wild onions could be foraged nearby. If you have never tasted wild onions, you are missing out. They hit somewhere between a chive and a spring onion, with this bold, peppery snap that made plain beef sing like a church choir. Wrapped up in soft tortillas or sometimes even more fry bread, they were simple, satisfying, and straight from the heart. This was not a meal that needed fancy cheese or salsa piled a mile high. It was pure, straight-talking flavor that left you licking your fingers and hoping there was just one more taco hiding somewhere on the plate. Now, if you think beef and onions are a match made in heaven, wait until you taste how a little bit of sage could turn a beef patty into something unforgettable. Corn chip beef bake was born from the kind of pantry raid that happened in kitchens all across America in the 1970s. Imagine this. You have a pound of ground beef, a half bag of corn chips, a can of tomatoes, and that lonely packet of taco seasoning tucked away in the cupboard. What do? You make dinner magic. This casserole was unapologetically crunchy, cheesy, and bold. You browned the beef with onions and taco seasoning, then layered it with crushed Fritos, cheese, and tomatoes. Some folks threw in a can of kidney beans, others swore by adding sour cream on top right before serving. No matter how you spun it, this dish was like a Tex-Mex lasagna dreamed up during a grocery store strike. It baked into a bubbling, golden masterpiece that was equal parts nacho, taco, and weeknight savior. Parents swore by it for potlucks, and just like that, a new casserole classic was born. But if you think that is inventive, wait until you see how cabbage and beef teamed up to stretch every dollar without missing a beat. Hamburger spoon bread bake was a southern trick that turned two humble meals into one. You seasoned ground beef, poured cornbread batter over it, and baked it until it puffed and browned. The meat stayed juicy, the cornbread caught the drippings, and every bite was soft and satisfying. You served it with a spoon, never sliced. That was the charm. It was food for people who had worked all day and just wanted something warm. It was often made with leftover cornbread or box mix, paired with beef fried with onions and maybe some paprika or chili powder. Cheese? Sometimes. Vegetables? If they were around. It depended on what was in the pantry and who was coming over. Spoon bread bake was loved in small towns where casseroles mattered, and feeding more people with less was a way of life. It might not look like much, but it was as filling as a second helping of love. Ever wondered what the ultimate American comfort food was back in the day? Well, the only right answer is the veal and ham pie. This hearty pie combined the delicate flavors of veal with the salty goodness of ham. The pie's popularity surged during the Victorian era. It originated in the kitchens of English settlers and was a practical choice for using up leftovers, but soon became a meal for the elite. While it was a luxurious delicacy in England, it was a staple in large households in America. Not only was it easy to whip up, but was also cheap to make, which made it perfect for communal gatherings and large families. If you want to give your grandparents a rush of nostalgia, ask them about this meaty goodness, and who knows, your grandma might even dust off some cookbooks. Sage-infused ground beef patties might sound like something you would find in a fancy restaurant today, but back then, it was just another stroke of pure homegrown genius. Sage was everywhere in the right parts of the country, and it did not cost a dime to pick some fresh sprigs. Mixed into ground beef with a little salt and a whole lot of care, the result was a smoky, savory patty that smelled so good cooking, you would swear it could make a grown man cry. Fried up in an old cast iron pan until the edges were crispy and the middle stayed juicy, these patties were tossed onto plates with a scoop of beans, maybe some fried potatoes if you were lucky. They were not just filling, they were soul-satisfying. And once you tasted beef lifted up by wild sage, you would wonder why anyone ever bothered with plain salt and pepper again. Speaking of dishes that hit you right in the comfort zone, the next one was a staple at tables that needed stretching a meal just a little bit farther. Make one of these this week. Start with the pinto beans or the split pea soup on a Sunday afternoon when the kitchen is quiet and you have nowhere to be. Bake a loaf of the homemade bread. Pull out a notebook, not an app, and write down what every ingredient cost you. Sit at the table, not the couch. Eat slowly. These recipes were never only about saving money. They were the quiet proof that a person with a pencil, a pot, and a few staples could hold her household together against a world that kept getting more expensive every year. Ruth Connolly did the math in pencil and kept the receipts. She fed her brother for 14 years on half of what her neighbors spent, and the shoebox of notebooks is still in an attic somewhere in Akron, Ohio. Drop a comment below. Which of these dishes did your own grandmother or mother make to stretch the dollar? Was it Hoppin John like Minnie Booker's? Was it cabbage rolls like Mrs. Kovach's? Was it split pea soup on a Wednesday night? Was there a notebook somewhere in her house too? The answer you remember might be the recipe somebody else has been searching for.